Happy Wednesday, everybody. Welcome in to an all-new episode of the Pack-A-Day Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on X at Andy Herman NFL. You can follow the podcast at Pack-A-Day Podcast. Thank you so much for being here. It was an interesting Tuesday. We had some franchise tags, some transition tags, a specific player who did not get either of those tags that we want to discuss today a little bit. I want to go over some free agent cornerback options for Green Bay, a little bit of Runyan Jr. buzz, and even some buzz about a quarterback in the NFC North. We'll get to all of that and a lot more today. Before I get started, though, shout out to our brand new Pack-A-Day Podcast YouTube members, Peter Johnson, Diego Adao, Wesley Sipes, Jason Bolson, and Mike Hayes. And a huge shout out to brand new Pack-A-Day Podcast Hall of Fame member, David Prendergrast. Thank you so much. All of your support means so much to me, whether it's just that you're checking out the episode every single day, or if you are doing the YouTube memberships, and certainly if you're doing a Hall of Fame membership. It really does support me all throughout the year and allow me to do this full time and do all the amazing things that we're doing here at the Pack-A-Day Podcast. So if you have not yet checked out those Pack-A-Day Podcast YouTube memberships, make sure to do so. But I'll say it one more time. I appreciate all of your support and just even tuning in every day. Subscribe, like, comment, do all those amazing things. But appreciate you guys a ton. Let's actually start with I guess, still current member of the Green Bay Packers who is set to be an unrestricted free agent next week. That is Runyan Jr. Let's start with Matt Schneidman's tweet that he put out about Runyan Jr. stating, quote, Packers starting right guard Runyan Jr. is set to be an unrestricted free agent and switched his agent to Drew Rosenhaus. Per source, Rosenhaus met with the Packers brass in Indianapolis, and there is mutual interest in Runyan remaining a Packer. Would have to be right price for both sides, of course. This makes sense. This makes a ton of sense to me. You guys have heard me talk about all offseason, really since the season ended up until now, and as we head into free agency, that I do believe offensive line depth is a real concern, and even not just depth, but competition. I'm less excited and comfortable is probably the right word with going into next season with Josh Myers and Sean Rhyan starting center and right guard going into next year. Being like, yeah, Green Bay's good. They're all set, good to go. I like Rasheed Walker. I would still like competition there. Love Jenkins, love Zach Tom, of course. But that center right guard duo, that still is really important. And I believe you can go into next season feeling okay about everything with your current starting group left to right. But you've got David Bakhtiari still likely to be released, still has not happened. We'll have to keep an eye on that still up until something finally does happen. You're going to probably lose Royce Newman, no sleep lost there, but you're probably going to lose him, which is at least somewhat of a depth piece. You have Runyan Jr. as an unrestricted free agent. You have Yosh Nijman, who's an unrestricted free agent. And all of a sudden, Caleb Jones, Luke Tenuta, those are your depth pieces. And we know the season doesn't start tomorrow. You can sign free agents. It doesn't always have to be your own. You can go out and acquire new players via the draft. And Green Bay, throughout the years, has done such a tremendous job of finding talented offensive linemen on day 3 of the draft. Not even just day 2, but on day 3 of the draft. Look at Zach Tom. Runyan Jr. is a great example of that. But I do think that this is a team that was a couple plays away from the NFC Championship, who is young, who is talented, and you want to continue to put Jordan Love and those playmakers in a position to succeed. Now, you might be thinking, yeah, Andy, I agree with you, but is Runyan Jr. really the person to do that? He had a really tough year last year, arguably one of the worst seasons of his career on the whole. And I agree with that aspect as well. However, what I will say, first 14 weeks of Runyan Jr. last year was a negative 6.45 grade for me, lowest on the team, all right? But in the last 6 weeks of the season, JRJ had a plus 1.50 grade. We've talked about how that competition at left tackle and right guard seemed to motivate a lot of those players at those two positions and even just kind of motivate everyone along the offensive line. Runyan Jr. is included in that. And Peter Bukowski mentioned that he spoke with Runyan Jr., and it was basically a situation where Runyan was a bit beat up. And it wasn't necessarily even the competition that helped Runyan Jr. It wasn't playing a full plate of snaps every single week in and week out. And that the fact that he was able to sort of split things with Sean Rhyan allowed his body to recover a little bit and actually play better at the end of the season. And we saw that evidenced by his play at the end of the year. And just simply put, Runyan Jr. outplayed Sean Rhyan at the end of last season. If you're just comparing, one versus the other, I would have argued, and I did argue at the time, even though I thought Jon Runyan Jr., again, first 14 weeks of the season was really the weak link of the entire team, period. But at those last 6 weeks, he outplayed Sean Rhyan. And as I mentioned, we know my thoughts on Josh Myers and what he does and doesn't do for this team and things that he needs to improve upon. But there does seem to be this opinion out there that, oh, Green Bay can just go to Sean Rhyan and everything's going to be fine. There are some reps that are on tape for Sean Rhyan that give me legitimate cause for concern and just a willingness to pause and say, hey, I don't think that you could just fully trust Sean Rhyan's moving into that right guard spot and thinking everything is just going to be fine. I think he's going to be a better run blocker than what Jon Runyan Jr. is or was. I do have concerns about him just getting beat rather quickly on some plays in pass protection. And that's where it seems like there's just those lapses. And that's been something that has been an issue with Sean Rhyan since his time coming to Green Bay. But we saw those still. That's not to say that Sean Rhyan can't improve. It's not to say that he can't get better. It's not to say that he shouldn't be the front runner for that starting spot. But if you want to bring somebody like a Jon Runyan Jr. back and allow him to compete for that spot, if you remember in training camp, he basically spent time like at center, potentially backing up Josh Myers as well. He has some position versatility. He started at left guard. He started at right guard. He's cross-trained at center. Don't think you're ever going to find him kicked outside to tackle, but you need that player on game days, even if it is, Sean Rhyan, Josh Myers, and Elgton Jenkins as your three interior players. What you ideally want is that next guy off the bench. You want two. You want your swing tackle, somebody who can come in and play left and right tackle in a pinch and be, solid enough out there where you don't have to spend a tight end, chipping and helping the entire game or a running back helping the entire game. And ideally, you've got an interior player who can play left guard, center, and right guard and kick in and play and, again, not be an unmitigated disaster like some backups have been in the past for Green Bay. First of all, Jon Runyan Jr. to me still could win that starting right guard spot, even if just given the opportunity. But if he doesn't, he's kind of that perfect left guard, center, right guard option that could go in and compete and you're not going to have this huge drop off. The big thing here, as Matt Schneiderman said, and I agree with, is it has to make sense for both sides. There's a really good chance that Jon Runyan Jr. just gets a better deal to legitimately start, not have to compete with Sean Rhyan with some other team. And especially with Drew Rosenhaus as an agent, he's going for money and starting opportunities. And like I said, it's probably just a better chance somewhere else. There's a good chance he's just gone. But we saw how he reacted at the end of last year and how much being a Green Bay Packer meant to him. And if he wants to stay in Green Bay and they can find a number that works for both sides, like I said, even though on the whole, the season as a whole was not a great year for Jon Runyan Jr., the end of the year gave me hope that he found the light and that he's going to be able to play at a overall better level. And it was just, 2021, where he was the best graded offensive lineman on the team for me. Now, in large part due to Bakhtiari being out and Elgton Jenkins going down with the injury and being out through the majority of the season. That was the reason, but he graded in the positive and was my highest graded offensive lineman for the year. If he can just get back anywhere near that, that would be a really great signing, especially if it is on the lower end of things. We'll see what happens. If I were betting right now, I'd probably say it's probably closer to like 70-30 that he's not back with the team, but I'm happy that they're having those negotiations. Would love if they found a deal that made sense for both sides, as long as it's not an overpay for Green Bay. And I'm all in on Jon Runyan Jr. returning to Green Bay if it is in fact the right price for both sides. So that's where we stand right now with Jon Runyan Jr. Next, I want to talk about that NFC North quarterback situation that I mentioned. Kirk Cousins, per numerous reports, seems to be destined to no longer be the quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings. And there's a lot of financial things here where he needs to be signed back with the Vikings prior to March 13th, or it basically just makes it so that Minnesota almost can't re-sign him. It also seems like Kirk Cousins, as he's done for the majority of his career, is going to go for the best opportunity to get him the most amount of money. It seems like that is not going to be in Minnesota. And if you look at the Vegas odds right now, these are not always perfect. We have seen situations in the past where the Packers were the odds-on favorite to get a player and it never came to fruition. I think there were times last year where Aaron Rodgers, like the leader in the clubhouse was definitely not the New York Jets. It was the Raiders, right? The Raiders were the Vegas favorites to land Aaron Rodgers. Well, guess what? He ended up being a member of the New York Jets. It's not always a perfect tell, but the odds are very high right now for Kirk Cousins to become a member of the Atlanta Falcons. Almost like they maybe know something. We'll have to wait and see. But he's right now favored to go to the Atlanta Falcons, and it doesn't seem like he's going to be back in Minnesota. Clearly, this affects the Minnesota Vikings because they are now without their starting quarterback. And they are going to have to aggressively pursue something because they don't have a great option. I don't think it's going to be a Jaron Hall, who was a rookie last year and did not look ready in any capacity. I don't know if they're going to go get a veteran. Could we see a Russell Wilson in Minnesota? Who knows? But they're probably going to have to move up and potentially grab a quarterback. There's a good chance. They pick at pick 11. There's a very good chance that there are 4 quarterbacks gone in the top 10 before Minnesota even picks. They could either end up with the 5th best quarterback if they wanted to reach maybe for somebody like a Bo Nix at pick 11, or they might have to aggressively move up to take a rookie. And even then, they might be getting the 4th best rookie like a JJ McCarthy, assuming that's the way it ends up, rather than maybe one of the top options in this draft. That is interesting. The other interesting aspect is that one of the rumored players and starting potential quarterbacks for the Atlanta Falcons has been Justin Fields. And there has not seemingly been a robust market for Justin Fields as a starting quarterback. The Falcons were one of those few teams that felt like a natural match for Fields to go to. If all of a sudden the Falcons have Kirk Cousins, that limits the Bears as to where they could potentially send Justin Fields. And you can't imagine that the Minnesota Vikings would become a potential Justin Fields destination. Doesn't really seem to fit with what Minnesota would want to do. But more importantly, is Chicago going to want to potentially trade Justin Fields within the division to a division rival in Minnesota? That's probably unlikely as well. So that really potentially mixes things up for both NFC North teams. I just want to go back to last year for a second. A lot of Minnesota Vikings fans hated a take that I had. I think it's actually my most viewed short video yet. And it's because Minnesota Vikings fans just roasted me to death. But I said last year, and I stand by it then, I stand by it now. I said the Minnesota Vikings are in a worse position long-term in the NFC North than the Chicago Bears were. And Minnesota Vikings fans were all in a tizzy because they've got Justin Jefferson and Christian Darrisaw and Jordan Addison and some really good young talent on that team. But I said, look at your salary cap, look at the age of Kirk Cousins. You're probably looking at moving on from Cousins sooner rather than later, and you don't have a long-term quarterback. Meanwhile, the Chicago Bears, at least at the time, had Justin Fields, and you sort of knew if Justin Fields didn't make it work last year that they were probably going to be picking early again, especially with having Carolina's first-round pick as well. Chicago has like $100 million again in salary cap space. They've got the number 1 overall pick. They've got the number 9 overall pick. They're going to get something in return for Justin Fields. They are still, to me, in a much better position than what Minnesota is, in large part due to, the quarterback situation. Chicago is going to have their choice of 4 quarterbacks that are going to go in the top 10 and potentially 5 in the first round, and potentially taking somebody like a Caleb Williams, who, to me, I watched almost every snap of Caleb Williams from last year. There's 2 games I'd still like to go through. To me, he is everything that you want to see from a potential dominant quarterback. I'm not going to go through a full Caleb Williams breakdown right now. I understand the concerns. The concerns are of almost no concern to me. To me, he is a stud, a bona fide number 1 overall pick, should clearly and obviously be the pick, would absolutely be the player that I would take number 1 overall if I were Chicago. Definitely don't love the fact that he could be going to the Bears, but to me, they still are in a much better position. And now Minnesota going to potentially have to scramble for a QB. This is probably good news for Green Bay. Minnesota scrambling for a QB, and now the Bears might get less in return for Justin Fields. Go Falcons. Go get your Kirk Cousins fix, and we'll see what that does for you in Atlanta, but it could affect both NFC North teams in the negative. Meanwhile, we had a bunch of franchise tags and a variety of other moves that happened on Tuesday. 2 players received tags at positions that Green Bay is interested in. If you remember the safety video I did last week, I mentioned Antoine Winfield is the top safety in the class. You know that already anyway, but it was mentioned at the time and is expected at the time that if Antoine Winfield did not get a contract done, he was likely going to get the franchise tag. They did not get a contract done. And guess what? He did get the franchise tag. That basically eliminates any chance. That doesn't basically eliminate. It eliminates any chance that the Packers would end up with Antoine Winfield. Was always an extreme pipe dream anyway, but he is all but off the market at this point. Kyle Duggar, meanwhile, for New England, mentioned him as well and also mentioned he was likely going to stay in New England. He gets the transition tag. Green Bay could still give him a contract, but New England has the opportunity to match. They have more free agent money than Green Bay. What you'd all but almost surely be doing is just doing the heavy lifting for New England, coming to the agreement with Duggar just for them to match it anyway. He's likely going to stay in New England, and he basically is now off the market for the Packers as well. The good news is that Xavier McKinney, who many thought would get the transition tag or maybe even the franchise tag, received no tag at all. There is a little bit of buzz around New York that maybe this was a good faith move by the Giants front office, saying like, hey, we're not going to do this for you, but we really want to work out a long-term deal, and let's work on this over the next few days to try to get this done. We'll see. As of right now, though, Xavier McKinney is set to become an unrestricted free agent. And if you are Xavier McKinney and his agent, it's great that the Giants are in good faith and want to work out a deal. You are less than a week away from legitimately hitting the free agent market and being able to have bidding from, every team in the NFL. And there's going to be a lot of teams, including the Packers, that are going to be interested in Xavier McKinney. And it does look like he is going to hit the market. Saquon Barkley also did not receive the franchise tag or transition tag. That was expected for the most part, but another player that's been a little bit talked about as a potential option for Green Bay. And then meanwhile, there were a ton of releases as well at some interesting positions. Safety and off-ball linebacker. Rayshon Jenkins for the Jaguars. He was a safety for them. He was released. Eric Kendricks, the Chargers linebacker, released. Jerome Baker, the Dolphins linebacker, released. And the Seahawks released two safeties, Jamal Adams and Quandre Diggs. Could Green Bay have interest in those players? I'm not going to do full breakdowns of those players today. We've gone through linebacker and safety already, but just really, really quick on these players. Rayshon Jenkins, 60.9 PFF grade last year, 1,099 snaps. He's 30 years old, primarily a box safety. Eric Kendricks, 72.3 PFF grade, 847 snaps last year, 32 years old, best in run defense at this point in his career. Jerome Baker, 66.6 PFF grade, 713 snaps, 27 years old, a little bit better on the speed coverage side of things than in run defense, but he's a little bit of a do-everything linebacker. Quandre Diggs, coming off arguably the worst season of his career, 55.1 PFF grade, 1,155 snaps, 31 years old, primarily that deep or free safety. Jamal Adams, 54.9 PFF grade, only 518 snaps, didn't almost play any the season before that, has shown significant signs of decline, 29 years old, box safety only, and probably not somebody that Green Bay should probably be super interested in at this point of his career. The most likely player of those released, in my opinion, would be Jerome Baker. I could see Green Bay having legitimate interest in him. I have heard some people say, like, hey, keep an eye out for these release players because we know Green Bay loves signing the release players because they don't factor into the compensatory formula. That's true, and that's right. I just don't know that Green Bay is going to have any major free agent signings that's going to get them any major compensatory picks anyway. It's not to say they wouldn't. I think Darnell Savage gets a signing that would potentially net them maybe a 6th or a 7th round pick. Maybe Keyshawn Nixon could get something that would net them a 6th or 7th round pick, but you're probably talking about 2 later round picks. And if you want to go out and spend in free agency, I wouldn't let that factor in all that much. I think this is probably a year where you're not set to get any like 3rd or 4th round comp picks. Just go out, sign free agents that you think are going to be the most beneficial to your team, and don't sort of handcuff yourself only to players who get released. I think Goody will be interested in the entire free agent market, whether players were released or not, and I wouldn't let the compensatory potential compensatory picks play that much of a factor in what you want to do overall this offseason. All right, so lots of news and notes. That gets us, though, to the cornerback scouting reports and kind of going over some free agent corners that Green Bay could be interested in. Just kind of looking at the depth chart in Green Bay right now, you have 3 primary corners, and those are really the only 3 that you have to know at this point. And that's Eric Stokes, Jair Alexander, and Carrington Valentine. And all 3 are primary outside corners. Keyshawn Nixon, the big unrestricted free agent. Corey Ballantyne, also an unrestricted free agent. But you don't have a slot guy right now. I'm not against potentially trying to play a Carrington Valentine or a Jair Alexander in the slot on obvious passing downs, but I don't think either of those guys are a full-time slot, and I don't think that's where you want them to live. So you do need a potential slot corner. We'll go over some outside corners today, but we're kind of looking primarily for slot guys, and Green Bay probably needs to address that position. They could bring back a guy like Keyshawn Nixon. They could look in free agency, or more likely they could look via the draft as well. But they are going to need somebody to patrol that specific spot and hopefully be a bit of an upgrade from what Keyshawn Nixon was from a defensive side of things just last season. Number one on my list of potential corners is Kendall Fuller. 5'11", 198 pounds from the Commanders, turned 29 in February, was a third-round pick in 2016, did not have a relative athletic score. 3-year, $40 million deal for $13.33 million per year is his projection. Last year had an 83.1 PFF grade, 76.6 the year before that, 81.5 the year before that. Had 79 tackles, 2 picks, and 9 passes defensed just this past season. When he was targeted, quarterbacks went 49 of 73, 67.1% completion percentage, 488 yards, 6 touchdowns, 2 picks, and a 101.9 rating. He had 4 missed tackles only for a 5.1% missed tackle percentage. He does have slot corner experience. He had 212 snaps in 2021, had 844 slot snaps in 2018, but as of late has been a primary outside corner. You do like his versatility. There are some thoughts that even potentially in the coming years that Kendall Fuller could play some safety as well. There are some thoughts that he could play in the slot. We know he can play outside. He's a very good cover corner. Don't let the stats fool you. He covered much better than what that 101.9 passer rating would indicate. He's got good change of direction, good speed. And listen, you need cover corners in Jeff Hafley's defense. Kendall Fuller, very good cover corner. He would fit. It's just how do you sort of figure out the calculus of Fuller, Jair, Stokes, and Valentine? You're probably going to have to play Fuller in the slot, which again, he can do, but he probably gets paid a little bit more on the outside. And then, does he want to play in the slot at this point too? That would be another question you kind of have to ask if you did go in this direction. But great blend of coverage and tackling ability. He's been a top 15 corner each of the past 3 seasons by PFF's grades. And then, the other thing you have to look at here too is just that contract, right? $13.33 million per year. It's not huge for a cover corner, but it's pretty big for a corner that is 29 years old. I wouldn't hate it. It's not a bad deal. I think he could live up to that contract. I just don't necessarily love it based on, him primarily being an outside corner. It's not exactly what you're looking for. It's a pretty exorbitant cost. He hasn't really played that slot position since 2021, and really legitimately until 2018. I would be excited if Green Bay signed Kendall Fuller. I'd be surprised if they went in that direction, but he would be a potential option that could do a variety of different things, including playing in the slot. Next up is Chidobe Awuzie, 6'2", 203 outside corner for the Bengals, 28 years old, will turn 29 in May, was a second-round pick in 2017, 9.65 relative athletic score coming out of college, projected contract 2 years, $21 million, $10.5 million per year, 62.6 PFF grade this past year, 69.9 the year before that, and 75.5 the year before that. This past year, 57 tackles, no picks, 6 pass breakups. Quarterbacks went 38 of 56 when targeting him, 67.9% completion percentage, 488 yards, 3 touchdowns, no picks, a 112.8 passer rating, 4 missed tackles only for a 6.7% missed tackle rate. Only 236 career slot snaps, though. This is an outside corner. This would have to be something where Green Bay said, hey, we like Valentine, but he was a 7th-round pick. We don't really trust it. Jair's kind of had some issues and certainly some injury issues as well. And we can't trust Eric Stokes. We need an upgrade and we want competition. And Chidobe Awuzie would give us that with somebody who has a little bit more veteran experience. Don't think Green Bay would probably do that, but he is a very good cover corner when he's healthy. He has had injury issues, 29 years old, primarily outside cornerback, probably an overpay when you already do have Stokes, Jair, and Valentine on the outside. And ultimately what I'll say here is it's an interesting option, but I don't really see the fit ultimately for the Packers. Next up, Steven Nelson, 5'11", 194 pounds for the Texans, turned 31 in January, 3rd-round pick in 2015, 7.43 relative athletic score coming out. 2-year, $14.5 million is the expected contract here. Last year, he had a 72.6 PFF score, 66.7 and 63.6 the 2 years before that. Last year, he had 63 tackles, 4 picks, and 12 passes defended. Quarterbacks went 45 of 74, 60.8% completion percentage, 711 yards, 1 touchdown, 5 picks when targeting him, 69.1 passer rating only, in large part due to all those interceptions. Had 7 missed tackles for an 8.8% missed tackle rate. Listen, he played 1,000 plus snaps from the slot from 2016 to 2017, but since then has primarily been an outside corner, only played 6 snaps in the slot all last season. The big question here is, could he play slot again? Would he want to play slot again? The answer is yes. Steven Nelson could be a potential fit there. The age and the contract are probably not worth it on the outside for Green Bay, and the age might not be worth it in the slot in and of itself because he may not just perfectly fit that timeline of kind of where the rest of the entire Green Bay Packer team is. Hard to have a full-time slot that's a little bit older as well. There's a lot of wear and tear at that position. He is only 5'11", 194, so you'd have to question that even if he was comfortable playing in the slot again. But the coverage is good. Solid veteran free agent signing. Good coverage guy. Can play outside, probably play inside. So yeah, I mean, for the cost, there's a potential reason to do it. Just not sure contract, age, position. Not sure it all goes together, but there are certainly worse things that Green Bay could do than sign Steven Nelson and try to convert him back into the slot. The next one is the primary slot corner on the market. That is Kenny Moore II, Indianapolis Colts, 5'9", 190 pounds, 28 years old, will turn 29 in August, was an undrafted free agent coming out of college in 2017, 7.35 relative athletic score, projected contract, 2 years, $13.5 million, 6.75 mil per year, 77.4 PFF grade last year, only a 55.7 the year before that, a 66.6 the year before that. Last year had 93 tackles, 3 picks, 6 passes defended, does have 1 Pro Bowl to his name. Quarterbacks went 64 of 81, 79% completion percentage, 594 yards, 4 touchdowns, but 3 picks, a 98.3 passer rating. Did have 12 missed tackles for a 12% missed tackle percentage, but he is a primary slot corner, a bit undersized, a bit older, but not at least in that 30 range. Again, primary slot corner, has great experience at the position, solid coverage skills, will have some limitations, right? If you're 5'9", you got to play the run. You got to play some bigger wide receivers from time to time. Like, there's just going to be some limitations with which he has, but you love his experience and you love the fact that he's been able to survive at that position for a significant period of time. The question here is, if you are going to give him this big contract, is he significant an upgrade over Keyshawn Nixon? And if not, maybe the answer would just be, hey, maybe just keep Keyshawn Nixon. And that brings us to Keyshawn Nixon. 5'10", 200-pound corner, 26 years old, turns 27 in June, undrafted free agent in 2019, 4.18 relative athletic score. Projected contract is 2 years, $8.5 million. Last year had a 60.0 PFF grade, 61.2 the year before that, 77.4 in limited snaps the year before that. Of course, 2-time All-Pro kick returner. Last year had 80 tackles, 1 pick, 6 passes defended. QBs, they targeted him a lot. And sometimes that kind of tells you all you need to know. But they went 74 of 95, 77.9% completion percentage, 717 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 pick, a 100.7 rating, had 15 missed tackles, so struggle with that as well, 14.6% missed tackle percentage. I did think he played a little bit better down the stretch, clearly has special teams value. I do think that teams legitimately picked on him at corner. He was kind of the weak link for a decent part of that season. Had that great pick against Kansas City to really seal the game. Also had a big, completion against him against the Giants that sealed it in the Giants factor. He's not the ideal physical size, speed, strength from the slot, but he always battles. And ideally you would like an upgrade. But here's one of the big things I learned studying the slot position this past week. There's not a lot of good ones out there. And the slot is really, really difficult. And even if you got a player that's like fine to okay, that's actually probably average to might even be above league average at that position. There's just not a lot of really good ones playing at a high level at that spot. If you can get one like McDuffie and KC, it can pay huge dividends, but most people don't have that. And maybe just sticking with Nixon, seeing if he takes another step this year. Again, I always love how he competes. You get that special teams, you got a little bit of a gadget player. I don't hate that idea. And it's not like there's like this perfect slot corner that's just sitting out there. Like, yeah, this makes sense. Let's go sign him. There just isn't. So I kind of lean maybe a little bit more towards just bring back Nixon and hope in the meantime you can upgrade that position via the draft, and or just Nixon gets better too. I'd be fine with either of those things. A couple cheaper options here. Miles Bryant, 5'9", 192-pound slot corner from the Patriots, turned 26 in January, was an undrafted free agent in 2020, only a 2.69 relative athletic score, so that might be a little tough for Goody to swallow. 2 years, $7 million projection, $3.5 million per year. Last year had a 66.6 PFF grade, 58.4 the year before that, and 59.5 the year before that. 77 tackles, 1 pick, 7 passes defended. QBs went 59 of 74, 79.7%, 570 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 pick, and a 106.6 passer rating. He had 10 missed tackles for a 12% missed tackle rate and primarily played in the slot. Despite his size, he's a pretty solid run defender. His issues have primarily been in coverage. Only 250, I think it was actually 250 yards after contact allowed, but like, or maybe just been 250 yards allowed. I'd have to go back and double check that. My apologies for that. But he also didn't play like a ton. Like, I don't know. He's a fine cover corner. This is sort of like your cheap option. Worse than Keyshawn Nixon, in my opinion. A little bit undersized, doesn't hit the Packers thresholds. This would be a bargain bin, sort of like, hey, we got to the end of free agency. We need some bodies. Miles Bryant's still out there. Maybe we take a flyer on him, sort of thing. Next one is another player who's a little bit more undersized, better cover guy than he is a run defender. 5'9", 183-pound corner from the Raiders, Amik Robertson, 25 years old, will turn 26 in July, so at least he's a little bit younger. 4th-round pick in 2020, no relative athletic score. The projected contract here is a pretty cheap one, like 1 year, $2 to $3 million. Had a 63.4 grade last year, 64.1 the year before that, only a 37.2 in limited time the year before that. Last year, he had 50 tackles, 2 picks, 6 passes defended. Quarterbacks went 40 of 64, 62.5%, 445 yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 picks, a 57.7 passer rating. Had 7 missed tackles for a 12.7 missed tackle percentage, but has played 383 snaps in the slot the past 2 seasons. He has some playmaking ability. He comes up with some big interceptions. I think he had a pick 6 last year. He is undersized. Run defense is an issue. He's inconsistent in coverage. Still young, still cheap. Possible free agent flyer with some upside as a playmaker and cover guy in the slot. Next one is the last outside corner I have on my list. That is Jeff Okudah. 6'1", 202 corner from the Falcons. Only 25. Just turned 25 in February. Remember, this is the 3rd overall pick in 2020. 8.87 relative athletic score. The contract here is expected to be like 1 year, $2 million. He's never clicked in the NFL. 50.5 grade after getting a change of scenery this past year. 59.4 the year before that. 53.0 the year before that. 44 tackles, no picks, only 3 passes broken up. Quarterbacks went 32 of 52, 61.5% completion percentage, 494 yards, no touchdowns, but no picks, 92.9 passer rating. Had 4 missed tackles, 8.5% missed tackle rate. Primarily an outside corner, has barely played in the slot, but does have a connection with Jeff Hafley, was there when Hafley was there at Ohio State. This would be a near minimum deal with an opportunity for Okudah to, sort of reunite with Jeff Hafley and maybe have a chance to make the 53. But this would be a back of the roster flyer that you maybe hope you can figure him out and get him playing at the level he was in college, which made him the 3rd overall pick in 2020. Last but not least is Trey Herndon, a slot corner from the Jaguars, 5'11", 190, just turned 28 years old, a 2018 undrafted free agent, 6.73 relative athletic score, 70.8 PFF grade last year, 55.8 the year before that, and 33.3 the year before that. Another player that would be a near vet minimum deal, 46 tackles, no picks, 9 passes broken up. Quarterbacks went 45 of 57, 78.9%, 485 yards, 3 touchdowns, no picks, 119.7 passer rating, had 11 missed tackles for a 20.4% missed tackle rate. Is primarily slot. That's like the only benefit here is he's played a lot in the slot, turned 28 years old. He has that experience, has some special teams experience as well, but this is a back of the roster corner with an opportunity to make the 53. Think Tarvarius Moore at safety last year. You hope you get someone like that and maybe they turn out. Tarvarius Moore did not. You see if Herndon does. If he doesn't, you just release him at the end of camp. My recommendation here, attack corner via the draft. It's a pretty good draft class at corner, and you're going to need some younger players, talented players, and some depth at that position. I don't think the free agency class is all that great unless you want to go get a L'Jarius Sneed, which he's going to cost you a draft pick via trade and then a huge contract. I would bring back Keyshawn Nixon. I would bring in Jeff Okudah as a flyer, vet minimum sort of guy that can have the opportunity to make it in camp. And then I would draft pretty aggressively at the corner position. That is my breakdown for today. A lot to discuss, of course. We went over a lot of different things, some potential players who got cut who Green Bay could be interested in, the Kirk Cousins situation, JRJ, some different corners that Green Bay could be interested in. But like I said, my thought here, draft a lot of corners if you can. Bring back Keyshawn. Hopefully you can find a deal that makes sense for both sides, and then Okudah on a vet minimum deal. That's going to do it for me today. Thank you so much for joining me. Always appreciate you guys. Shout out to Mo State of Minnesota, PJ Wynn, John Wild, Jay Bradad, Brandon Paletta, Jennifer Wright, Boom Handle, Donald Lee, Lori Lord, Baby QB, David McCluskey, Donald Decker, Bremen, and David Prendergrast. I'm thankful that list is so long that it takes me a while to get through it now. Just always appreciate the support. I'll see you guys tomorrow. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.